Right, you're probably aware that Canon have released two new, pretty much flagship level cameras, the R1 and the R5 II. But how do you decide between these two cameras? If you're looking at them, right, if you're thinking about getting one of these, how do you pick the right one for you? Well, I'm not going to lie to you, both of these cameras are fantastic. They are both flagship level within Canon's kind of lineup of cameras, both RF mount, mirrorless cameras, and they share a huge amount, surprisingly in some ways, in common. But there are some differences, some pretty big differences, and some smaller differences, and we're going to go through them to decide which one is the right camera for you. But up front, I'm going to give you my kind of overall thoughts of how to pick between these cameras. Realistically, the R1 is aimed at sports photography, at wildlife photography, news broadcast, anything with very fast moving subjects where you need a very rugged camera, very solid tank of a camera. It does have a lot of the latest tech in it from Canon. It's very, very fast at shooting 40 frames a second, for example, very quick, able to capture fast moving subjects, and perfect, like I say, for sports. If you focus on that area, then the R1 is actually going to be one of the better cameras that you can get at the moment. However, if you shoot a broader range of subjects, if you like to dabble in a bit of this, a bit of that, maybe you shoot a little bit more video as well, I would say that the R5 II at the moment is one of the best cameras that you can buy. Unless you need something specific, and that's what the R1 is a little bit more of a specific, a little bit more niche into certain areas, the R5 II is one of the best all-rounder hybrid cameras that you could even think about getting, and is incredibly well future-proofed with lots of tech in it to make your life as easy as possible, and some amazing upgrades over the original R5, some really great refinements. The second generation of camera like that often really benefits from learning from the mistakes of the original, and that's certainly the case with the R5 II. So if you're a hybrid shooter, if you're shooting lots of different things, or even just, focusing in on things that aren't sports, wildlife, and very kind of extreme stuff like that, the R5 II is probably the camera for you. It also works out a little bit cheaper as well, so you've got some money left to actually get a lens. So that's a very quick synopsis, but let's look at the key differences, shall we? So starting with the actual sensor, both of these have new sensors. The R1 has a 24.2 megapixel CMOS sensor. The R5 II is 45 megapixels. So you've got more resolution on the R5 II. Now there's a reason for that. The R1 is all about speed, not just in terms of how it's capturing images, but also in terms of workflow, sending those files off. And for the kind of stuff you might shoot with the R1, 24.2 megapixels is probably the perfect sweet spot for actually sending those files off as quickly as possible and keeping those files at a manageable size. Whereas the R5 II allows you a lot more room to get loads more detail, to crop if you want to. There's a lot more flexibility in the way you can shoot those images because you have so much more detail to play around with. Now, both of these cameras have the new Digic X processor, and they both have the new Digic X accelerator as well, which allows them to do all kinds of fun things like in-camera upscaling to get even more detail out of your images, better noise reduction and things like that. It means they both have much faster autofocus than cameras like the R3 or the original R5, and they both have the action priority mode as well. So if you do want to shoot sports with the R5 II, you've still got a great option there with the action priority. If you're shooting football, basketball, the camera is actually going to be able to work out who in the scene is most likely to interact with the ball, and therefore who it should be focusing on, which is really impressive to watch it in action. I've shot with the R1 and the R5 II shooting basketball, and it was really interesting to watch that mode working in real time. It's very impressive. So no real differences in terms of processing there, but we do see some differences in terms of the speed. So the R1 is able to shoot 40 frames a second, so it's very, very quick, and it also has pre-capture. So if you have that turned on and you half press the shutter, it's constantly just loading 20 frames kind of in a buffer, right? So that then when you do actually start firing, you've already captured 20 frames as well. So if you're anything like me and you just press the shutter a fraction of a second too late, don't worry, you've already got the 20 frames before as well, which is super useful. Now the R5 II is still very fast, 30 frames a second is still outrageously fast. You do have pre-capture as well, it's 15 frames. So you've got that capability in both cameras, but the R1 is faster. So again, aimed towards sports and wildlife and fast moving stuff like that. The R1 is also able to shoot at a much faster shutter speed, so it can go up to 1/64,000th of a second, whereas the R5 II is 1/8,000th of a second. So that's worth being aware of. And when it comes to autofocus, both cameras feature the new dual pixel intelligent AF, which is the newest version of Canon's kind of flagship autofocus system. That means both cameras have got things like advanced tracking, where it can track people even when obstacles move in front of them. It can actually estimate where the head is. It can kind of work out joints and things like that of people. So not just head and face, but it can actually really pick up all different aspects of a subject like that. It's got much better subject detection when it comes to the algorithms it's using for that. So face, head, eye, but then animal, dog, cat, horses, planes, trains, vehicles, loads of stuff like that. I mentioned action priority as well. That's working in both cameras, allowing you to capture sports nice and easily. And you've got eye control autofocus in both cameras, which allows you to control the autofocus point just by looking through the viewfinder. So you can look where you want the autofocus point to be and actually control it that way. It's super easy. We saw it in the R3 a couple of years ago, but it is improved in the R5 II and the R1, and it is really something special. It sounds like a gimmick, actually works really well. Both cameras feature in-body image stabilization up to 8.5 stops, and both cameras are able to shoot some pretty serious video. So the R5 II for me is the better video system, and I think this is absolutely deliberate. The R5 II can shoot 8K up to 60 frames a second. That's in RAW, 4K 120. You've got loads of codecs, so you can choose the way you want to shoot. It also matches in terms of color science and things like that with cameras like the C400. So if you want to use it as part of a larger production, that's ideal. You can use it with the EOS Cinema cameras like that to get some great stuff. You're going to be able to match them up in the timeline, no worries. The R1 is still a very capable video system as well. 6K up to 60 frames a second in RAW, again in camera, 4K 120, loads of codecs. You've got Canon Log 2 in both cameras, you've got Log 3, you've got HLG, you've got loads of stuff in both. They're very capable video systems, just a little bit higher resolution on the R5 II. And for me, that would be the camera I would choose when it comes to video. Now, I think the biggest difference between these two cameras is the way they feel and the way they're built. The R1 is, of course, a bigger camera. It's got that integrated grip design on the bottom. It's built like a tank, which is no surprise because, of course, the 1 Series has that kind of heritage, right? It's designed to go out in really crazy conditions and be absolutely fine. The weather sealing is about as good as it's going to get on a camera like this. It is unreal. The R5 II does have weather sealing, just not quite to the same level. It is a little bit smaller as well, fits nicely in the hands. You can, of course, pop a grip on it. In fact, there's some pretty useful optional grips. For example, one that has a built-in fan. So if you are shooting a lot of 8K video, you might want to pop that on the camera to extend how long you can shoot for without any problems with overheating. Now, that said, of course, the original R5, as you may remember, had a little bit of an issue with overheating. The R5 II doesn't seem to have that problem, which is good. It will overheat eventually, but especially with that built-in fan, you're looking at a long time of shooting 8K footage. For me, at least, way longer than I need to be shooting 8K because I just don't have cards that are going to take that much 8K footage, to be honest. So that's not really something I'm worrying about. Sticking with the differences, again, in the body, we've got the EVF, right? So on the R1, it's 9.44 million dots, lovely OLED viewfinder, 120 frames a second refresh rate, and it's nice and bright as well. So on the R5 II, it's a little bit lower res, 5.76 million dot, again, OLED EVF, 120 frames refresh rate again. So it is a nicer EVF on the R1. It just is nicer. It's very lovely to shoot with. That's not to say it's not nice on the R5 II. I still really enjoyed it, but there is a little bit of a bump up there on the R1. Now, that does make sense to me. I think on the R1, you are more likely to be shooting with the EVF maybe more often than you would on the R5 II because of how much video you might be shooting on the R5 II compared to the R1. But, I mean, look, you're not going to have a bad time with either of them when it comes to the EVF. That's also true of the LCD screen as well. They've both got the flip out 3.2-inch screen, which flips out, turns around. I think that's really useful. And then, of course, there's a massive difference when it comes to the price. So at the moment, both these cameras have just come out, so this might differ depending on when you're watching this video, and you can always check the links to actually go and see the latest price. But the R1 is coming in at about £6,999. That's here in the UK, whereas the R5 II is about £4,499. So you're talking about, it's about £2,500. That's quite a lot of money. I mean, you can get some seriously nice glass to pop on the front of your camera with that money. Now, for me, the R5 II is what makes the most sense. It's the camera that I think for most people makes the most sense. It is such a good camera for so many different things. It is unbelievable. If you're a hybrid shooter, or if you actually, to be honest, do you know what? If you just shoot photo or even just shoot video, you are going to have such a good time with this camera. The amount of flexibility capability and versatility in the way it can shoot, the amount of things that it can do, and just the level of all-rounder ability it's able to capture is unreal. Now, the R1 is a fantastic camera, but it's a little bit more aimed at a slightly narrower target, right? So your fast-moving stuff, your sports, your wildlife, stuff like that. For that, it feels somewhat unbeatable. It's an incredible piece of kit. It's an incredible tool of a camera. For me personally, the R5 II is the one that I'd be looking at. Now, that also doesn't take away from cameras like the R6 II, which is also great, just a little bit lower in cost again, still some fantastic features. Canon have really brought out a lot of very strong cameras recently, and it's really exciting to see. I'd love to know which camera you would go for. Let me know in the comments and let me know why as well, because I think that's super interesting. Of course, you can check out the cameras for yourself, but check out the links down in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well, because there's new stuff all the time. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.